We're going to cover these topics today in revision. So the 5 pillars, 10 obligatory acts, we're going to break those down, make sure we know the difference in how they practice them, think about the implication and how it affects their lives, a Muslim's life, to be able to do these practices. And then we'll have a little look at some exam questions and how we maybe start thinking about analysing and evaluating these practices. Just remember that obviously the beliefs unit is very much about like that inward, what do they believe, you know, how does it affect their life? These practices are very outward. It's that part of Islam which you'll see most often represented, because it's those outward acts that they will do to express those beliefs in Allah, to show their devotion, show their dedication, show their self-discipline, and how they're sort of answering that call to submit to His will. So there's a real active part to all of these, and just bear that in mind as we go through. Okay, so let's start with some key words. Now, by the end of this, hopefully we will have talked about all of these. Again, this is something you can refer back to. It's a good game, just to sort of go through and just make sure we know which each of these are, and that we could use them in a sentence and maybe try and make some links between them. How does Tawala link to Tabara? How does Eid al-Fitr link to Saum? How does Zaka link to Coombs? Just so you've got some of the vocab there, which we're going to be looking at today. We'll come back to that at the end as well, just to see if we've actually talked about all of them. So main thing here, you've got your main practices, okay? So you've got your Sunni 5 pillars and your Shia 10 obligatory acts. And when we're going through these, thinking about similarities and differences, obviously you've got the Salah, Zaka, Saum and Hajj, both there in the 1, 2, 3 of the obligatory acts, and number 5 as well. So those are your similarities. They do have slightly different ways that they do this that you can pull out as we go through. So for example, Salah, the prayer, Sunnis do that 5 times a day at 5 different times. Shias will do the 5 prayers but 3 times. Salah, for Sunnis, they pray with their head on the floor or on the mat. Shias, they play with their head on a brick, so it's slightly different to the way that the Prophet Muhammad did it. Little things like that just to be pulling out as we go. Comparing things like Zakat, so given the 2.5% of charity, Shias do that as well, but they also give that additional Coombs payment, that 20%, where half goes to charity, half goes to the religious leaders. We'll explore those a little bit as we go through, but just a nice sort of visual here to start thinking about our comparison between the 2 different ways that the Muslims will practice. So let's start with Shahada then. This is our first pillar, sometimes known as the root pillar. This idea that it's like the foundation that all the others are built on. Why are they called pillars in the first place? Remember, they are that sort of structural part. They're the skeleton, if you like, of the body of Islam. They're the sort of daily, annual, monthly sort of life structure for a Muslim. The reason it's seen as the foundation pillar is because it is that declaration of faith, that bit highlighted there. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. This is whispered into a baby's ear when it's born. Before it's heard its own name, it's heard the name of Allah and the name of Muhammad. It's recited during the daily prayers. It's called upon in lots of the other pillars. So it's kind of one that is a reoccurring theme. I suppose the difference is with this is that it is a declaration of faith. So I suppose you say it out loud. That's what the practice is. But it's not so much an action, this one. It's more that it leads you to action. Because if you do believe in God, that sort of tawhid, that oneness of God, it's going to drive you to want to pray every day or want to fast during Ramadan. So that's why it's kind of that kind of foundation that the other pillars are built on. Shias also do use the Shahada. They do add this extra line in of, and Ali is a friend of God, because if you remember from the beliefs part, Ali was the leader who took over from Muhammad, and that's the one who the Shias wanted. Later, Ali does become the Caliph also for Sunnis, but for Shias, obviously there's a big foundation with the grandson Hassan, who is killed and martyred, which comes later into the Ashura practice that we'll look at. But they add this extra little line in. And again, so you've got that sort of assessment of like, well, how important is the Shahada if it's different Muslims? But then they both have the Shahada, so that's super important as well. But Shias don't have it as part of the 10 obligatory acts. It's just more like that sort of background practice that they just assume everyone will do. Let's move on then and have a look at, oh, too fast, Salah. So Salah is this daily prayer. The main prayer is on a Friday. That's the Jummah prayer, which you'll see at the bottom here in green. You'll see there's a sort of linking between all the ways that these slides are put up. So you've got some of the keywords are highlighted in green. You've got anything that's to do with Shia is in orange. Sunni later becomes in blue as well when we're picking them out. All the yellows are quotes that you can pull out. So again, if you want to start a little quote list as we go through that are really useful, that's something you can do on here. So daily prayer, we know that it's 5 times a day. Starts, as you can see on the bottom right hand side, before sunrise. Then you have that midday, afternoon, evening, and after sunset prayer. They do have special names and they've put them up there for you. You don't necessarily need to learn those names. That's not going to be one of those key things that you need to learn. It's just having that knowledge that they have names and that they're different from each other. So the morning prayer is different to the afternoon prayer, it's different to the sunset prayer. The rakas, the movements that they make when they sort of bend forward, then they'll prostrate with their head on the floor. Those are the rakas, the movements that they'll go through. They again are, there's different repetitions that happen at each of those different times. So the Maghrib, the sunset prayer, I think has slightly more, and then there's slightly more time given at each opportunity for personal prayers that can be put in as well. This quote I think is really useful here. The Lord says, "Call on me and I will answer." That's from the Quran. It's this sort of like, you know, belief that underlies this practice of that God is listening. He is omniscient, he's omnibenevolent, all these qualities that Allah has. And if you call on him, he will answer you. You are talking to the creator of the universe during this prayer, and you are stopping 5 times a day to do it. That's a lot of time out of your life to stop, put aside what you are doing, focus on God. Again, it's about that self-discipline, this idea that you are taking that time for God, showing that submission to his will, and keeping him at the forefront of your mind. If you've just gone from prayer and then you go back to your daily life, go to your work, to try and then, you know, that jihad, that sort of struggle for God. Let's say you're tempted to be angry at somebody or tempted to, I don't know, miss the next prayer. If you have just prayed, you're going to be spiritually refreshed and be able to go back into your life with this real intention to follow God's order and his commands. Before they pray, they perform the wudu, these ablutions. Again, there's a very specific way they will pray. The quote here, you can see in the top picture on the right hand side, this sort of alcoved area that's sort of in shadow. That's the Qibla wall. And contains the mihrab, the bit that points towards the Kaaba. So Qibla is Kaaba. So they all face that direction when praying, whether you're at home, whether you're in the mosque. They'll find the direction of Mecca, of Kaaba, southeast for people in Britain, and they will mentally, physically draw their eye and their attention towards God. They can use prayer mats. Again, at the mosque, this is like built in, but if you're at home, you just create that suitable space for prayer, that clean space that you'll come to. If you are at the mosque for the prayer, the imam is going to lead that prayer for you, particularly the Jummah prayer, the one on Friday. So everyone will be in sync when they're doing it. If it's a more informal, just people are dropping into the mosque at different times, normally during the sort of daytime prayers, they might start off and finish at different moments because they've got to go back to work or something. But again, it's just that time to sort of spend that focus with God. Women and men pray separately. Again, so this is a bit of modesty. You don't want, you know, when you're thinking about, you know, bending over and lying, you know, putting your head on the ground, you don't want to be thinking, being self-conscious. So men and women just will pray separately. The rakas, as you can see, are the movements here on the left hand side. These are the different ones they do. The prostration is the main one that you need to know. That's the part where the head actually goes on the floor. And again, it's just this idea of like showing that God is the most high. So you're lowering yourself. And that's how we spell the Jummah at the bottom, the Friday prayers. So in Arabic countries, Friday is a weekend day. They don't have Saturday, Sunday, they have Friday, Saturday, because that's when they'll go to the mosque during the day for that service. The imam will lead them in a service, and then they will sort of spend some time doing the rest of the weekend things. All right, let's do Saum. Saum, we need to know, is fasting during the month of Ramadan. Now, they could ask you this in different ways on the test. They could ask you about Saum, they could ask you about fasting, they could ask you about Ramadan. Essentially, they would be asking you the same thing. It's just to remember that the month is called Ramadan and that it's the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, and that's when the fasting happens. Why do they do it? Because this quote here, it was the month of Ramadan that the Quran was revealed as guidance for mankind. So any of you present that month should fast. It's a direct quote from Allah in the Quran that this month is a time of self-discipline, of depriving yourself during daylight hours of eating. So you can remember those people who are hungry. You can, think more charitably towards other people. During this month, on it's usually the 27th that it's celebrated, is the belief that that was the night of power, the night that the Quran was given to Muhammad. And so that will be like a whole night of celebration. People stay up the whole night eating and obviously spending time with their family. Because again, in Arabic countries, during this month, there just will be no food places open during the day. And yet restaurants will open at sunset and they'll stay open till 3, 4 in the morning, because they want everyone to have that opportunity to get together and break that fast in the evening during sunset hours. So focus on the fasting during the daylight hours, given to charity and pleasing God. No food or drink during those daylight hours. It's obviously much more difficult in the summer because the days are longer. They are also forbidden from doing other things like smoking, sex, swearing, general bad habits during daylight hours, because you should be spending this time for God. Some Muslims do believe that this is the time when sort of the devil is chained. So anything you do during this month is not because the devil has been tempting you, it's because you are choosing through your own free will to do this. So you are trying to just cleanse yourself of all these bad habits during this month. It's a time of really refocusing on what you should and shouldn't be doing. There's a little list at the bottom on the right of the sort of do's and don'ts during this time. Self-discipline, again, really important key word here. Why are these all duties? These pillars are duties to Allah. Why? Because you are developing self-discipline, this awareness of God, showing submission to God and his orders. There are obviously exceptions. You are not supposed to make yourself unwell by following this. So there are health reasons if you're pregnant, if you're a nursing mother, so if you're breastfeeding, you don't have to do it. Children and the elderly, and if you're just unwell that month. There are some sports people who will break their fast. So in my class the other day, we were looking at people like Mo Farah. He during one of the Olympics, it was Ramadan, and actually he broke his fast so that he could run and represent his country and his faith and what he was doing, and then he added the days on at the end. So for example, if a woman has her period during the month or the week that she'll have it, she can tag those days on the end if she wants to, but actually that's not necessary because you just are not expected to do it. Again, this is idea of charity. So when you're feeling hungry, you can then think about the poor who feel that way every day. And actually part of the Eid celebration at the end of this, Eid al-Fitr, it is about giving to charity because you've just remembered what it is like to be without things. So we'll move on in a second, but just think about this for a moment in terms of like how easy this pillar is to do in the UK. For part of the 12 markers, you might get a question that's about, which is the easiest to follow, or which is the most important, or which is the most useful practice. For this, you can kind of draw a deeper comparison for those higher achieving answers between how it might be for a person living in an Arabic country to do this versus a person maybe living here. It might be less taxing for somebody who lives in a country where they have the Islamic faith, because everything's built around it. No one will be eating during the day. Whereas if you're here in Britain and you are fasting, then your friends at school are going to be eating around you, and this sort of level of temptation must be really tricky. And actually maybe that self-discipline is even harder if you live here versus if you live in a different country. So again, some just other things to be thinking about as you go through this. Let's move on to Zaka then. So the Zaka is the alms giving. It's important to know that it's almsgiving. ALMS is a way of saying charity. So if you give alms in any charity, in any religion, it's about giving to others. Okay, but they do use the word alms sometimes in the exam, so it's worth noting down that that means charity. The idea for this is your duty as to Allah is to purify yourself of greed. That is really what it is. So that your first thought isn't, oh, I have money, great, what can I spend it on? But, oh, I have money, what can I give of this money? So there's a duty to give 2.5% of your savings each year. And remember, this is about like your total wealth. So in the second paragraph, it says only give Zaka if you can afford it. That's the Nisa. So if you are able to. If you have over 8, so this is sort of old measures of money, which they've sort of changed into a modern way. So it says in the Quran about having 87 grams of gold, which is the equivalent of about 2,200 pounds today. If you have that much left over at the end of the month, then you can, or as your wealth, then you can donate. If you've got less than that, then obviously you might be receiving the charity or the almsgiving. So there's no need to then give. This quote at the top, God is well aware of whatever you do. That is super useful, that quote, for all of these pillars. Why do Muslims do any of these practices? Because God is well aware of whatever good you do. And actually, if you're thinking about the angels being with you, writing down all those times you fasted, all those prayers that you've done, he is aware of everything you're doing. And there is the day of judgment. They believe you will be held accountable for all these things. And it says alms are meant on for the poor. No, meant for the poor. Take the out of that quote. And the needy. Now, 2.5% if you're a multimillionaire is not very much. I mean, it is a lot of money, but it's also not a big percentage of your money. So there is also this Sadaka, which is the green word there, the additional voluntary payment that could be paid at any point. You might have had like an influx of money but done really well that month, and you might just want to give a little bit of extra because you're able to that month, and that's called a Sadaka. So the 2.5% is the part that you are commanded to give. That is your duty to give. The Sadaqah is the additional payment. So why do they give it? You've got your 4 bullet points there. It fulfills your duty to God. It's a true sign of being a Muslim. It gives you a good attitude towards money, strengthens the community, so the rich support the poor. So the Ummah, that sort of brotherhood of Islam. And Salah is the prayer for the poor. Zakah is taking action. Again, when you're thinking about comparing these pillars, which is more important, you've got the Salah is you're praying for the poor, but Zakah, you're actually taking action to help. You're actually doing something. And Zakah is one of the only pillars where it's about other people rather than just yourself or the direct Muslim community. You can give to charities directly like Islamic Relief, or you can put money into like a collection box at a mosque, or in Arabic countries you can have it paid straight out of your bank account sometimes. So there is a choice as to where that money goes. At the bottom, you've just got this idea of Shia and Coombs. We'll come back to this again in a bit, but they do give Zakah. Remember, they give the 2.5, but additionally they give Coombs, which means a fifth. It literally means a fifth. So that 20% of tax paid on their excess income, on their savings. Half, that's supposed to say, not hold, half is given to charity and half to the religious leaders. And that goes back to those roots in terms of they want to, they have the imamate, that leadership, those leaders that they want to support. Let's move on to Hajj. Now this one is a little bit trickier. There's a lot to this. I'm going to go through this very quickly, guys. This is something which you'll need to go through by yourselves because there's so many elements to it. I will very quickly run through them all with you, but it's actually up to you to sort of be able to pick out the key parts. I've got some questions at the end which will help with that. You've got the map at the top right, which sort of shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, what they do. They start sometimes in Medina, which is that part of the top, move down to Mecca, they'll do the circling of the Kaaba, go to stay the night in Mina, go down to the plains of Arafat, do the standing at Arafat, through Muzdalifah, picking up the stones to Mina to stone the walls, and then back up to the Kaaba to circle it again. Let's break that down a little bit. The picture underneath is a picture taken during Hajj, and it's taken during the prayer And you can see how packed it is by the Kaaba, that black box there. Remember that Kaaba is super important. During Hajj, they are doing it. Why? Because it says in the Quran, pilgrimage to the Hajj is a duty owed to God by people who are able to undertake it. Going to the house, walking in the footsteps of those prophets. Muslims spend their whole lives praying towards the Kaaba 5 times a day, learning about Muhammad and his journey, learning about Ibrahim, learning about all these prophets. And they might only go to Mecca once in their whole life, because that's when it's the duty to go, just once in your life. Can you imagine what it's like to look upon that box that you have been praying towards 5 times a day for the whole of your life? And maybe you don't go there till you're 40 or 50 years old, and finally you're in that mosque, the Masjid al-Haram, and you are seeing it for the first time with your sight. You are with 3 million other people, all undertaking the same thing, their duty to God. In this ihram, this white robe that the men wear, these 2 pieces, and these sort of demure clothes that women will wear to show this sort of humbleness that you should be showing, modesty, that was the word I was looking for. And just that sense of community must be completely overwhelming. It's not a holiday. It's not even, I would say, sometimes very enjoyable. There are so many people and you're rushing to get these duties done. It's very different to a holiday, but you do it for this one time, okay? Hajj should be undertaken at least once in a lifetime, as long as you're healthy and wealthy enough to do it. There is no obligation to go if you're too old, you're not rich enough, because it can cost thousands of pounds to go, or if you're, for health reasons, can't make it. It takes place in Mecca in Saudi Arabia between the 8th and the 12th of Dhul Hajj, which again moves in our calendar each year because that's in the Islamic calendar. You've got the origins of this inspired by the Hagar, Ibrahim's wife, and her son Ishmael walking in their footsteps. You've got the running between the 2 hills is walking in their footsteps in the story, and the bringing up of the Zamzam water when she needs water for her son. That's the Safa and Marwa, the 2 hills. You've got the Kaaba, obviously, which some believe was first put there by Adam, rebuilt after the flood. Then Ibrahim, that's where the idols were, and he returned to that place. And then obviously Muhammad, this is where he smashes the idols of the city before he gets chased out and comes back in, sort of conquering that city for God. So days here of what it is that they do. Firstly, you've got the top. They start by getting to the state of ihram. What do they do at this point? They have the ritual washing. They'll adorn the white robe. That white robe is a symbol of purity and equality, so you can't tell who's a super rich person, who's the poor person. No makeup, no perfume, no smoking, no sex, nothing like this that happens during the state of ihram. You're in the state of purity. Remember, this robe is also what you will be buried in. So what you wear on Hajj, you can then be buried in to show that you have fulfilled that duty. So day 1 starts with this circling of the Kaaba. They'll walk around it 7 times anti-clockwise. They'll try and touch that cornerstone, that black stone where they believe that Muhammad left for his night journey. They walk between the covered hills or run, depending on how fit you are. Bear in mind they're walking on marble and barefoot most of this time, so it can be very tiring and taxing on your body. So they do that run 7 times to remember this miracle of the Zamzam water when Hagar needs the water for her son. God tells her to stamp her foot on her ground. The water comes up and she's able to save herself and her son. Then they travel to Mina, the tented city, where they'll stay overnight and just sort of sleep. Sorry, that picture's the running or the walking between the 2 hills. That's now undercover. Again, a modernization because it's air conditioned. People used to die during that because it was so hot. When they stay in the tented, that's a Zamzam well. Forgot to put all these pictures on. Stay in the tented city. Next, they'll travel down to Arafat, where Muhammad delivered his final sermon. They do then the standing at Arafat. So from midday till sunset, they'll stand there. Now, again, there's some covered areas that you can retreat to if you want to, but it's just a time to pray, to dedicate that time to God. This is where they believe that the forgiveness happens. All right, this is a really important part of the Hajj. They have collected their stones from Muzdalifah. after they're standing at Arafat. So they're very tired. They've gone back to Mina to sleep, and then they go to the stone walls. Now, this is actually an old picture that I've got here because it's now under a huge kind of almost looks a bit like a multi-story car park sort of endeavour, again, just so they can try and get people through there so they can tick this off their list of what they've done. They'll stone those walls because they are remembering the 3 times that the Prophet Ibrahim was tempted, because when he is asked by God to go and sacrifice his son Ishmael, he says he'll do it, and then the devil tempts him to not do it. So when they're throwing those stones, they're trying to remember, they're trying to think about their own temptations. They're trying to think about what they're tempted by. And every time they throw a stone, that's what they're doing. They're being like, I will not be tempted by this. I will do better. Then this is when the sort of Eid starts at the end of this, Eid al-Adha, so the one with the A, because it's the festival of sacrifice, and they're remembering this. The men will shave their heads, women will cut off a finger of their length of hair. Day 4 and 5 is basically used there for them to then complete this. They'll go back to the Kaaba, walk around it 7 times. They might go back, they'll come out of the state of Iran, but they might go back and stone the pillars again and sort of tick off completing these last few things. So why do they go? Brings this deeper spiritual transformation, teaches them sincerity and humility, this inner peace, justice, forgiveness and mercy. That's the part of Arafat. Self-discipline, mental and physical, the unity, that brotherhood, the ummah, equality, that there's no distinguishing between rich and poor, all in the state of Iran there. Reminding of their faith shown by Ibrahim and his family leads to the forgiveness of their sins. Now, there's a couple of questions here. Again, I'm not going to go into these right now, but you can have a work on these. So these are specifically all about Hajj, how they might ask the questions. Give 2 actions performed during Hajj. Explain 2 reasons Muslims go on Hajj. Literally any of those bullet points above. Explain 2 ways going on Hajj may influence a Muslim's life. How they're going to feel that being forgiven. They're going to understand about equality. They're going to understand, how will that do? 12 marker, going on Hajj is like going on holiday, or is it important for all Muslims to go on Hajj? So go and have a little practice at those. Right, the 10 obligatory acts, let's just run through. So we've done Coombs a little bit, so we're not really going to go through that anymore. Jihad we'll do in a minute. These 4 here, it's worth learning maybe 1 or 2 of those. Again, you don't need to know all of them, but the idea is that it's different. What do they add into the 10 obligatory acts? So encouraging people to do what feels good, or encouraging people to do good, and discouraging people from doing wrong. Again, that leads into these ideas like corporal punishment and how will they discourage people from doing wrong. Tawala, to be loving towards the friends of God. That's the sort of, and including Muhammad and the imams. That's where the Coombs payments comes in, that 10%, helping the imams to, support their livelihoods. And then Tabara, disassociating yourself from enemies of God. If you're around people who aren't Muslims, maybe you're going to be more tempted to do things. So they're just structures in a way of how to better aid your life, how to sort of really make sure you stay faithful to God and you can consistently submit to his will by actually, not hanging out with people who aren't of the same faith as you. So you're not going to be as tempted. Again, think about doing Ramadan in England versus doing it in Saudi Arabia, where you're surrounded by Muslims. It's not so much that they're enemies of God, but it's just anything that would make you maybe forget the Tawheed, the oneness of God. Okay, jihad then, let's rush through. My path is straight leading, this is my path leading straight, so follow it. Remember, jihad means struggle. Think struggle, struggle, struggle whenever you see the word jihad. The greater jihad is that personal inward struggle that happens every single day. The struggle to follow those 5 pillars and all of God's commands, to purify one's heart against evil, to learn the Quran off by heart, become a Hafiz, to avoid drinking alcohol, doing drugs, being greedy, being jealous, deepening that connection to God. That's the daily jihad, the daily struggle that Muslims go through. And you could argue the most important one, because it's the one they will do. That's why it's the greater, the one they'll do every single day. So again, if you get a 4 marker or a 5 marker, it says what is the difference in views of jihad? What are 2 views on jihad? You've got the greater, you've got the lesser. The lesser is less important than the greater jihad. It also doesn't happen as often. So it's their outward defending. So in a greater jihad is the inward, the lesser jihad is the outward struggle against foes, essentially, to defending your right to practice your faith. Although several Muslims, several accounts of violent wars in the Quran, Muhammad being part of those, most argue that they were justified as Muslims were facing persecution. So they were being attacked for being Muslims and they were defending themselves. They were never the aggressors, but they were defending themselves. And so that's kind of what holy war is for jihad today. If you think about your theme on religion and conflict, this holy war is exactly that. So it has to be declared by a fair leader. It should not be used to convert others to Islam, or as a response to the threat to faith. It shouldn't be to gain territories or wealth, and it should always be the last resort. There's also this confusion there with terrorism in the fact that terrorists are often called jihadists, and this misperception and this misunderstanding of what a jihad actually is, which comes from the terrorists themselves, because obviously they want to keep everybody guessing and making them think that they're Muslims when we know that that's not the true meaning of it. So you won't really ever need to write about terrorism here, because unless it specifically asks you about terrorism, because they want the true meaning of jihad, and that is that lesser jihad is that outward struggle to defend one's faith or one's ability to follow their faith. So both jihads are the purpose is to bring you closer to God. You struggle, yes, but in that struggle, God's nature is revealed to you. It's a voluntary day of fasting, but it's not much more than that for Sunnis. It's a much bigger festival for Ashura because it's a day of mourning, essentially. It remembers the martyrdom of Hassan, who was Ali's son, Muhammad's grandson, who died in the field of battle very early on in the years of when you're thinking about evaluation, you're thinking about what's important, what's most important, why is something not most important, why is it significant, why is it not significant? And this is just a really brief way of doing that. So let me show you how you use it. So you've got the 5 pillars in orange, and then you've got a couple of the obligatory acts in blue. You could do this as well with the festivals, so Ashura, Eid al-Adha, and Eid al-Fitr. For Shahada, so first of all, what is it? We know